Dear Leonard, to look life in the face, always to look life in the face, and to know it for what it is.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. What I'm about to tell you I was hoping to share since the end of June of this year, when the NICOLA bully inquest first came out. I decided not to go there, so to speak, because the whole conversation had become toxic. And if you said anything that didn't involve the overwhelming and popular foul play narrative, well, you got drowned out. Since the Gaynor Lord case, some people have become more receptive to what I'm about to say, and, well, some people still refuse to even think about it. The Claire Marshall case is basically the same story all over again, except we know little more than the bare bones of that story. Only a single grainy image of Claire Marshall was ever provided to the public. I have to wonder, though, did we ever need more than that? Did we need more than that to know what this was about? The NICOLA bully case and the Gaynor Lord case share one thing in common.
Yeah, I know.
I know you'll say it's very flimsy. Or if it's not very flimsy, it's a Golden Gate Bridge of sturdy coherence in terms of psychology. And this thing that is in common between NICOLA bully and Gaynor Lord is anxiety, isn't it? Anxiety is present in some shape or form in both stories about both women, despite rigorous attempts to stop this aspect from ever being known. When it is known, then people want to minimize it. In NICOLA bully's case, relative to Gaynor, there was a lot more information about anxiety and an ongoing struggle. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I'll be doing another live stream following on the analysis we did in terms of the JonBenet Ramsey case. We'll be continuing to look at those documentaries and the timeline on the 27-year anniversary of JonBenet's death. So look out for that. I hope you're enjoying this Christmas, this festive season. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, according to the toxicology, and obviously it's the toxicology relating to NICOLA bully, there were small amounts of two medications in her blood, paracetamol and a prescription beta blocker, propranolol, were found in the body. What is propranolol typically prescribed for? Why was it prescribed for NICOLA? And was she on it? Was she on this medication at the time of her death? Well, propranolol is a classic anti-anxiety drug, though God knows they could have come up with a better name than one ending in no-lol. Was it prescribed for NICOLA? Yes. Was she on this medication at the time of her death? Well, of course she was. Traces of it were found in her body even 3 weeks after her death. Was NICOLA struggling with anxiety over December, Christmas, New Year's, up to the 10th of January, and all the way up to the fatal Friday morning on the bench, with Willow panting beside her? We know far less about Gaynor, let alone her medications, but we do know that Gaynor brought up her anxiety to a colleague literally on the day of her death or the day before. So we know it was a factor in some respect in Gaynor's story. We know next to nothing about Claire Marshall, except that what happened to her on the Monday following the discovery of Gaynor's body on the Friday. There's literally 2 days separating the one's body being found and the next one's body going missing. Claire, dressed in dark clothing that morning, set off alone in the dark, and ended up in the River Tay in another non-foul play scenario. But the part that kind of sticks out and that is obvious is we know that Claire died quite close to Christmas, that it was less than a week away. And we know that the same timeline in a way was relevant to Gaynor and also to NICOLA. They all died within basically a month of Christmas. I want to wrap up my commentary on NICOLA and Gaynor and Claire by reading part of an excellent comment left by one of you a day ago. This is a quote from that comment. As a young mortician, I was shocked at the proportion of cases we dealt with that were of middle-aged women. From those that left notes, over time, I began to see a pattern. Women who felt overwhelmed, exhausted, and overburdened by the responsibilities of their busy lives, whilst at the same time feeling invisible. Now I've reached middle age myself. I know firsthand that it's a time of enormous physical and psychological change. Many women are under pressure to provide the most comfort, security, and reliability at a time when they themselves are feeling less comfortable and less secure maybe than they ever have, and when their own bodies can't always be relied on to give them the energy they need to do it all. The fact that these women are often described by the people that knew them as happy individuals, thoughtful, kind, and supportive, it only goes to show what a good go they had at fulfilling what was expected of them. But then something happened. You said that these cases show that something is wrong with society here, and I think you're right. We still live in a society where women are hugely admired and celebrated for their physical, youthful beauty, valued most highly for their ability to give of their time and energy to others, and therefore when the natural aging process makes either or both of these things more difficult to achieve, there's feelings of failure and despair. Anxiety is then something middle-aged women deal with a sense of shame, and the larger society with embarrassment. Until we begin to value people just for being people above all else, I'm afraid these sad incidents will be repeated. I must say thank you very much for sharing these thoughts with us, Bette May Davis. I read somewhere that for most people, for the average person, the unhappiest time of our lives is around 48 years old. That's kind of comforting. I've gone through my late 40s not feeling particularly chipper. The fact that a lot of other people are going through a similar dip makes me feel less grumpy. Maybe it's not just me. Some say that you'll hit rock bottom at exactly 47.2 years old, and then from 48.3 we seem to turn a corner, and the good news is things seem to go really well for us from our 70s onwards. Why is that? Well, according to the Daily Mail, by this point, in other words, we are unhappy at 47 or whatever because stress levels are at their highest, because finances are stretched the most. I also think because our responsibilities in terms of work are at a peak, and those who still have their hair are going rapidly grey. In other words, we are becoming very aware of our mortality. Our bodies are visibly aging. We're visibly losing our youth. But I think there may be an even simpler explanation. Two things happen in our late 40s. Firstly, the consciousness begins to dawn on us and then to crystallize that we are, after all, mortal engines. We're not going to be here forever. Time is starting to catch up to us. We begin to lose parents and friends. We start suffering increasingly significant health scares. That's the first thing. Secondly, this flows from the first, we begin to have to deal with and face the notion of loneliness for the first time. People that are around us are not around us anymore. And it's not necessarily actual loneliness. There might still be people around us, but being alone in a certain respect, in terms of our lives, in terms of the psychological journey we're on. And Bette May Davis has just kind of explained an aspect to that. How do you deal with the end of your youth? How do you talk to someone else about it? What would you say if I told you we're terrible at dealing with reality on its own terms? True crime YouTube is especially bad at it. It can never be reality just the way it is. Facts without varnish. Gloss. Without exaggeration or distortion. How many channels right now have stories with the word shock in their titles? And at the end of the day, are these stories even true? In the movie The Hours, Virginia Woolf explains the human condition in a nutshell. To look life in the face, always. To look life in the face and to know it for what it is. I would say that we cannot always look life in the face, because that is to understand the full horror of what awaits us. Death. Death is part of life. And death is a lonely fate. It's one that we will all meet in whatever shape or form alone. But we should not avoid looking life in the face either, because that is a kind of denial of reality. It's a depressed effort at living where one wants the good stuff while avoiding the bad stuff. Life doesn't work that way. In a few minutes, I'm supposed to have Christmas lunch with my family. It's out in the country, so I'd like to take my dog along. The alternative is to leave him alone at home while we're out enjoying ourselves. Newsflash, dogs are social animals and they don't tolerate being left on their own very well, although this is something they must occasionally experience. After all, lone wolves must sometimes find their way to another pack, and they must survive on their own, and they must be on their own, and that can be a lonely trek. That's a kind of rite of passage for wolves. Sometimes we must do the same. People are more like dogs than cats, even if we think we aren't. We're social animals. We are a peculiar type of animal that doesn't seem to like to admit it has weaknesses. Strange. Superheroes have weaknesses, but we don't. Iron Man's weakness is his heart. Spider-Man's weakness is friends and family. Aquaman's weakness is being away from water for an extended period. Superman's weakness is an artifact from his homeworld, kryptonite. For Wonder Woman, it is her own lasso of truth. And I find that quite interesting, that Wonder Woman can get ensnared in her own mind in a way, in her own truth. You can get caught up in that yourself. Human beings like NICOLA, like Gaynor, like Clay, like ourselves, we don't like to admit there might be weaknesses in a world that gets by on displays of strength. This is why we don't know how to deal with weakness. Because we don't acknowledge it, we don't know how to deal with it when it starts pushing through as we get older. Being lonely or unhappy now during Christmas, it's a kind of kryptonite. It's that kind of weakness that is poking through. It can cut through all of that appearance, and it can render us very low. And the way to deal with it is to simply stop trying to keep up the appearance. Another way to deal with it is just let this period of discomfort go by. Soon it'll be the end of Christmas and the beginning of the new year. I think the reason Christmas is such a psychologically vulnerable time isn't just because we are put on the spot in terms of our social status. Have you been asked, who are you spending Christmas with? Or are you alone? It's that question, but in the context of a perceived crowd of happy couples and families all living their fairy tales. And you might be exposed for not being in a fairy tale yourself. What are we afraid of? Well, we're afraid of social death. But the reality is our social circles ebb and flow like the tides. Sometimes we're popular. Sometimes we're at the bottom of the roller coaster. Sometimes we lose people we can never get back. There's no silver lining to that. It might be a best friend. It might be a parent. It might be, God forbid, a child. It might even be a beloved pet. Sometimes we get lost ourselves. You don't lose someone else. You lose yourself. Society can be a safety net that takes care of us, but that can't happen if the society itself is superficial, shallow, all about appearances, all about when things are going well, all about being stuck in its own denials that keep it in a scenario of omnipotence. It doesn't want to acknowledge weakness. It is in the face of fear that courage means so much. It is the weakness a superhero must navigate and know it for what it is, to know how and when to exert their power. A superhero that just ignores their own weaknesses is going to be in deep trouble. And so the same with a human being. Be aware of your weakness. Try and learn to navigate with that weakness that is part of reality. Anxiety is an important quality in human beings. It helps us avoid things that aren't good for us. But if we allow anxiety to take hold, and anxiety eventually becomes a default setting, then the anxiety isn't good for you. It's maladaptive. It slowly poisons our ability to think, to live, to exist at all. Only you can decide how much anxiety you need. The answer isn't none. And the answer isn't constant anxiety. It's a happy medium somewhere in between. And you find it by learning to live in the real world, not by running away from it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.